In 2017, adaptive content has become a buzzword. To some, it's about structured content. To others, it's about something akin to magic. Our final speaker will share her perspectives and reservations on how adaptive content is being used today. She's a teacher, author, and a managing partner at Bond Art and Science. Please welcome Karen McGrane.
I'm kind of a high-minded idealist about the web. I think the web is its own medium. It's not print, it's not television. And the values that define the web, the things that make the web great, are its fluidity, its flexibility, its accessibility. As Derek Featherstone told us, the web can be accessed by people using alternative input devices or alternative keyboards or screen readers. The web can be accessed by people on fast or slow connections. The web can be accessed on every type of device with a browser. We don't need to splinter or fragment the web to get it to work this way. It naturally works this way. Well, as long as we don't break it. This philosophy can be summed up by the concept of there is only one web. The W3C says that one web means making, as far as is reasonable, the same information and services available to users, irrespective of the device that they're using. Now, when you read this, it sounds a little bit like responsive web design. I would argue that today, responsive web design is the latest skirmish in the battle for one web. With a responsive design, you can maintain a single set of content that you deliver up on a single URL. You maintain a single code base. So instead of fragmenting your efforts across a variety of different platforms and screen sizes, your entire team is pulling together against the same release schedule. And as a result, you get more value from your initiatives. This sounds amazing, doesn't it? I mean, why would anybody ever do anything else? Sadly, if there's one thing that I've learned from my 20 years of web consulting, ain't nothing ever that simple. Livia Labate, who was the director of UX at Marriott, who led a large-scale responsive replatforming of Marriott.com, said that she would go into meetings and her stakeholders would tell her, I need more than a responsive website. I need it to be adaptive. The problem is that no one knows what that means. And yet, today, we are told repeatedly that we need to go beyond responsive design. Responsive isn't good enough. We need to move beyond the responsive web and optimize our website for mobile users. We need to move beyond responsive and discover context first. We need to move beyond responsive to the adaptive web. This guy says that we should move beyond responsive and adaptive to something he calls adjustive web design. I don't know what that guy's talking about. And all of these articles, I will summarize for you, are essentially saying that when people talk about adaptive, it means it's magical thinking. They're basically saying you're going to wave your magic wand over your magically created adaptive website, and it's magically going to deliver up exactly what your users want. So in this talk today, let's talk about 3 strategies for how you publish across devices. The first is responsive, the second is adaptive, and the third is my old friend, the M.Dot website, or a separate mobile website. I got a little model I'm going to walk through here, but just to make sure everybody's on the same page, let me give you just a brief little definition. Responsive web design is fluid grids, flexible images, and media queries. It was first defined in an article in a book by my business partner, Ethan Marcotte. One of the things that I really like about responsive, or the definition of responsive, it is that it's clear and consistent. If you are doing these 3 things, then by definition, you have a responsive website. Next to that is the concept of a separate mobile site, or an M.Dot site. What that means is that you deliver up a separate website on a subdomain like m.company.com. It's usually, that's how you get the moniker m. But because you are serving up a different website to mobile users, it often contains a paltry subset of the content that you deliver up on the real website. And the real problem here is that teams are stuck maintaining two completely different versions of their website, which nobody has the time or resources for. There's another, even more important problem, though, with an m. site, and it's that we actually have no reliable way to detect device type. This is one of those things that when you go talk to your stakeholders, talk to your executives, it's very hard to convince them that devices do not announce over the internet, hey, I am a tablet, or I am a smartphone. You should deliver the smartphone experience to me. The only way that you can do that is by expensive and complex server-side device detection. And the only people who are really enthusiastic about server-side device detection are the people who sell the server-side device detection libraries. So the downside of an m. site is that you wind up serving the wrong layout to particular devices. This happens particularly with larger Android devices. They wind up getting a bad experience, a bad layout, because they're getting a form factor that is optimized for smartphones. A study by Radware found that larger Android devices were likely to get served the m. layout 25 to 30% of the time, even though those devices are similar in pixel density and layout to the iPad mini, which gets served either the full site or the t. site. So, I think everybody knows what responsive means, and you can wrap your head around an m. What the heck is adaptive? I will offer my definition of adaptive, which is that it means that you are serving people something different. And so the question becomes, you're serving them something different based on what? You don't want to have a one-size-fits-all model, so what is different? I want to unpack some definitions of adaptive here, and one of the problems that we have in this industry is that we have burdened the poor term adaptive with far too many meanings. One of the most common definitions of adaptive that you see is also my least favorite definition, by the way. In this definition, responsive is completely fluid, okay? So across all sizes of screens, the website adjusts fluidly. Adaptive is essentially a series of fixed-width designs that snap into place at particular screen sizes, often optimized for what people imagine are the most common screen sizes. So if you look here, watch how these boxes expand. They expand completely fluidly in between the breakpoints where additional columns jump in. In an adaptive solution, those boxes stay the same size, and then they jump to a larger size of box. So in this scenario, teams can imagine that they are creating a series of fixed-width designs for expected device sizes rather than creating a completely fluid design. This is an example of a prototype for an adaptive design tool for iOS apps. So you can see that they offer three sizes of screens, iPhone 5, 6, and 6 Plus, in portrait and landscape. An adaptive design tool like this might make a lot of sense if you are designing for the fixed universe of iOS applications. It doesn't make any sense at all if you are designing for the sheer variety, the hundreds, if not thousands, of screen sizes, pixel densities, and orientations that you're going to find on the web. Now, the reason that I don't like this definition of adaptive is that I think it should just be called, like, badly implemented responsive. And here's why. It's because when I give you this definition of adaptive, let me call attention to what I think is the most important word, which is serving. So that definition of adaptive is something that happens entirely on the client side. I would like to offer a competing definition of adaptive, which is that adaptive solutions require that you get the server involved to serve something different. So then the question becomes, when do we want to get the server involved? So let's go back to this little model here. The first question we want to ask ourselves is, are you serving information to the same URL? Adaptive, so with a responsive solution, yes, you are. Adaptive allows you to sidestep some of the more problematic issues with an m. In an adaptive solution, you can dynamically serve different information into the same URL. In fact, Google often refers to adaptive solutions as dynamic serving. Luke Wroblewski coined the term REST, which stands for responsive and server something. I would argue that's also another definition of adaptive. Responsive design is client-side, meaning that the whole page is delivered to the device browser, to the client, and the browser changes how the page appears in relation to the dimensions of the browser window. Adaptive design is server-side, meaning that before the page is delivered, the server detects the attributes of the device and loads a version of the page that is optimized for its dimensions and native features. I got this definition from the Huffington Post, which is my most trusted source of news and information about the web. Ethan loves it when I argue the definition of responsive design with him by quoting the Huffington Post, because I mean, what has he got that's going to argue with that? I think it's worth noting here, though, that responsive design is Google's recommended approach for building mobile websites. Now, Google's not going to penalize you for building a properly managed MDOT site, and Google certainly has no problem with adaptive or dynamic serving. In fact, Google uses adaptive products, dynamic serving, for a lot of their products. If you have the time and the resources and the money of a Google, then I say go to town on adaptive. But if you are just one of the mere mortals, like the rest of us, who are concerned with SEO, then I think it's worth saying that there's no organization on the planet that is more invested in the idea that you will serve up a single set of content against a single URL than Google. It makes their job of searching and indexing the web that much easier. So, the URL is clear. Next question we have to ask ourselves is, are you serving up the same design? In a responsive solution, yes, you serve the same design to everyone. In an adaptive solution, you don't have to. And obviously, with an MDOT solution, the design is completely different. So, under what circumstances might you want the design to change? One question you might want to ask yourself is, would it make sense for us to be able to serve a different page under some circumstances? A while back, I worked with a client. It was a university client. And they had just done a soup to nuts, ground up, burn it all to the ground and start from scratch, desktop-only redesign of their website. And they came to me and asked if I would consult with them about what they should do on mobile. And so I said, I think you should build a time machine and go back in time and not have done that. This proved infeasible. So I did a little research, a little audit, came back in, did one of those meetings with all their executives and stakeholders where I came back and I said, I think you should do a responsive retrofit. So what a responsive retrofit means is that you take the existing desktop front-end code, you drop in some media queries, drop in some breakpoints, and now the website will squish down. Is it perfect? Not really, but given that they just did all this work, it was the easiest and best solution for them at the time. So I gave this recommendation, and it was like this chill comes over the air. I mean, you just see their body language get all hostile, and they're like sitting there like, no. And I'm like, literally, I'm dragging the browser window closed in the meeting, like, no, look, you could totally do this. And finally, somebody speaks up, and they're like, Karen, you just don't understand how political our homepage is. And I'm like, try me. And they said, well, if we go responsive, can we serve a different homepage? And I'm like, of course you can. What do you think, Ethan Marcotte comes over to your house in the middle of the night and yells at you for being a traitor to the cause? I mean, if the only thing stopping you from making the other 11 bajillion pages on your website responsive is that you don't want to deal with all the stakeholder politics of like whose stuff goes where, in the same environment as a responsive solution, well, then just cut a different homepage and we'll all go out for an early lunch. Man, this is the easiest consulting job I've ever done. And I don't want to even make this seem like it's a total cop-out. So no less than Chris Coyer. So Chris writes CSS tricks. He has a product called CodePen that's aimed at developers. Chris has talked about how they themselves at CodePen mix responsive design with mobile templates or adaptive templates. Chris and the team basically said there's some pages on CodePen that just make perfect sense to handle responsively. Like, it's just super easy for them to look at that and go, oh yeah, like here's how it's going to work, no problem. And he said there's other pages that they just really felt they couldn't offer the optimal experience on small screens and large screens, and so they cut 2 different versions of those templates. Now, honestly, if there's anybody out there who could ninja his way through a CSS solution to any problem, it's Chris Coyier. But they decided, no, we actually think it'll be a better user experience, it'll be easier for us to maintain if, in specific and limited scenarios, we deliver a separate page. But in many cases, the problem doesn't even encompass the entire page. Some teams find that they just want to serve a little component, just like one little feature on the page adaptively. Beatport they're kind of like a combination of like the Billboard charts and Spotify for electronic dance music. So they recently responsively replatformed their entire app. And for just one feature, the audio player, they said it really felt like it wanted to be different at small screens and large screens. They said, we wanted that player to be just right, and we didn't think we could handle that responsibly. So they cut a small version of the player and a large version of the player, and they do a little device detection to figure out which one of those they serve up. But everything else is responsive. Fidelity had a similar problem with, can you guess what it is? It's tables. Right? Tables are one of the hardest problems when you're dealing with small screen sizes. Like, they have large amounts of data, and you can't just squish it down, so how do you handle the presentation of that information? So Fidelity found that they had this sort of industry standard table, and the table had an industry standard order in which the columns appeared. Problem was, some of the most important columns were really far to the right. So if they just took the first few columns of the table and showed those at small screen sizes, then small screen users would not see the important stuff. So they made a decision, oh, well, let's take those important columns and move them to the left side of the table so that a small screen user will see them. But then large screen users complained because the columns were out of order. And so they said, we felt like in that scenario, it made sense to cut 2 different versions of that table. We'll serve up a small screen and a large screen version. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret here, though. Fidelity came back to me after they told me the story and said, oh, yeah, that totally wasn't necessary. We didn't actually need to get the server involved there, because instead, we could solve our problem on the client side using conditional loading. So conditional loading is a technique where, for example, like the Guardian here, what they're doing is they're conditionally loading in additional information. So you might see that, like on this tablet view here, these headlines don't have an image, and then over here they do. That's something that they're handling dynamically on the client side using JavaScript. They are not loading all of those assets for every user and then hiding ones that they shouldn't show. Rather, they are conditionally loading in only the assets that they need for the users that can see them. So conditional loading is a performance-friendly approach that allows teams to make different decisions based on screen sizes. But they are not using display none to hide information from users. That's a bad strategy. Display none, not a content strategy. So my advice for you here, if you have a problem that is literally and sincerely about the size of the screen, about how you get your stuff to fit on the screen, then you should solve that problem client side. You should solve that problem using responsive design. Don't get the server involved if you have a problem that is related to screen size, because client side is the best way to solve that. When then would you need to get the server involved? Well, let's go back here. Are you serving the same content to all of your users? So I bet you can guess where this is going. Responsive design, for better or for worse, you are serving the same content to every user. Adaptive design has been touted as a solution to creating device-specific content. And of course, with an MDOT solution, different content. So I'm an advocate for OneWeb. I'm an advocate for responsive design. And I have to say, I have some concerns when I hear people talking about the idea that adaptive content should be used to deliver up different information to different devices. And when I really dig into my concerns about this, I realize that I have literally only myself to blame for this problem. I am the person who popularized the idea of adaptive content. I've been talking about this since 2012. most people know who I am because this is probably the most popular thing I've done. I wrote a book called Content Strategy for Mobile where I told people how to do this. In this book, in this talk, I outlined a case study from NPR, popular case study called COPE, Create Once, Publish Everywhere. It's a case study of how NPR was able to use adaptive content, dynamically served content, to serve information to different devices. So they had one article model in which they might have a headline and a teaser and images and the body copy and the metadata, and they would serve up one version to the desktop website. And they could serve up a completely different version to their audio player. The audio player could be like, oh yeah, give me the headline and the short teaser and the audio file, but yeah, don't give me any of those images. I'm an audio player, what am I gonna do with them? They could serve up different information, different objects to their mobile website, different information to apps. Heck, they could serve different information into the desktop application of iTunes, which frankly was just showing off. And so when I really dig into this, it's easy to see how this has become the poster child for serving up device-specific content. Hey, you want to know who just went responsive? Oh, it's NPR, yeah. And Patrick Cooper, who's their head of digital, says, yeah, we had a phone website and a tablet website and a desktop website, and we really only maintained the desktop website because we just didn't have enough resources to cover all of those fronts. It just wasn't a tenable situation. So, lest you think I'm standing up here recanting my position that the Earth goes around the sun, I believe that there is a huge amount of value for organizations in digging into what I would call the granularity of their content. So the value of structured content, the value of metadata and taxonomy holds true. But it's a very easy leap for organizations to make when you start thinking about creating smaller, more granular chunks of content, perhaps creating alternate forms for different contexts, to realize that then you can dynamically target that content according to certain criteria. You can serve up different information according to what you know about the user or the device. So, I have a little confession to make. Everything that I know about adaptive content, everything I know about really web publishing in general, content management, is based on the fact that I was the only person at my job in the early 90s who knew how to do a mail merge. And I had to do it using WordPerfect for DOS, so you kids and your graphical user interfaces can suck it. A lot of what we talk about when we talk about adaptive content, or when we talk about personalization or content targeting, those are actually just a really dressed up way to talk about doing a glorified mail merge. It's just that we now have a richer vocabulary of cues, contextual triggers, I like to call them, for how we might tailor that information. Let's walk through what some of these might be. So, Dean mentioned some of the pitfalls and trade-offs of personalization, and I think mobile and multi-device content has really raised some significant questions about how we might want to tailor the experience or deliver something different. One of the ways that people often want to serve different information is based on the device. So people might want to look at the operating system, or whether someone's on desktop or mobile. They might want to look at the device type specifically, whether that's TV screens or watches. They may even want to look at the capabilities of the device and deliver different information based on that. A second way that people might talk about tailoring the experience would be tailoring to the context of use. Now, I have a very specific definition of what I mean by context, and it's the idea that you can pull data, information, from the sensors on the device that will give you some cues as to what the user is doing or where she is or what's happening. So there might be things like the time of day or the location of the device, but it could also be other things like the velocity at which the device is traveling, or the barometer that might tell you how high or low it is, or the temperature at which the device is at. All of those are cues to the user's context. A third way that people talk about personalizing is through personalization to the person. So that might be things like the age of the person, or that person's gender, or what you know about their life stage, or what languages they speak, or what kind of relationships they're in. I'm going to really neatly sidestep that whole personalization question. As Dean says, I think it's kind of overblown. I want to focus on the question of what does it mean to try to serve different information to the device versus what it means to serve information based on what you know about the user's context. So let's start out by asking, like, when would it make sense to look at whether the user's on desktop or mobile, or the other devices that the user might have, or the capabilities of the device or the operating system? When might you want to look at that and tailor the experience to it? So there are definitely scenarios in which it makes sense to serve up different information based on the device type. Let's say AT&T wanted to implement a responsive design for all of their support content. They might deliver a responsive site that would adapt fluidly to all sizes of devices, but they would still be using adaptive content to tailor the content that they were serving up to the device type. Why? Because the content is literally specific to the device type. The last thing I would want for AT&T to do when I went to their support section is to have them ask me, hey, what kind of device do you have? AT&T, that's kind of the foundation of our relationship here. I think you should just, know what sort of device it is that I have. But even with this example, I want to make it clear, if they are serving up or perhaps prioritizing information based on my device type, it's not that they are forbidding me from seeing other information. If I have an iOS device, yes, of course, show me that first, make that the prominent information. But don't keep me from seeing content about Android devices because I might be trying to help a friend or a family member with an Android device and I need to look things up. All of that adaptive content, though, is still served into a responsive framework. So it's not that adaptive and responsive solutions are different things. They actually work together to serve the user's needs. Another way that you might think about this, I teach at the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, and they have a responsive website, they have a mobile app, and then they just bought all of these digital signs that they want to put up all over campus. And so I think this is a great example of the need for granularity in adaptive content. So when you look at an event listing like this, they want to take the same event listing, but have it broken down in a granular enough format so that they can publish it to two very different form factors and still have the information make sense and be presented and rereadable. I can look at a web page like this and imagine that if all of that information about the event was just dumped into one big WordPress blob, like maybe the event time was bolded and the images were all stuck in there, there'd be no way for them to pull that data back out and have it render appropriately on a different size screen, on a TV screen. Having that granularity, having that structure, makes it possible for them to say, oh yeah, on the TV screen, make the title really big and only show the short description and feature the time and date of the event in this way. That's the value of having adaptive content to serve different device types, some of which may not be the web. But adaptive content is sometimes touted as being able to serve device-specific needs that it can't really serve. So for example, the Content Marketing Institute this year hypothesized that adaptive content could be used to tailor the verbs that we use to suggest to users how they should interact. So if the user had a keyboard, we would say you should click here. And if the user had a tablet or a touch screen, we'd say tap. And if they were in their car, we'd say select. The problem with this, we have no reliable way to detect the user's input. And I know this is one of those things that it boggles the mind when we're talking about mobile design. It seems completely intuitive that we should be able to know if the user has a keyboard or if the user is using a touch screen. But the sheer variety of devices that are available on the internet, the fact that none of those devices actually reliably report back over the web what they are, the idea that people might have a keyboard and a touch screen, has led virtually everybody who's gone down this path to say, nope, don't try to detect input, don't try to tailor the experience to input. Instead, try to develop a solution that is resilient enough that will work across devices, that will work across screen sizes. And so for the language that you choose, don't try to tailor that language, just find something that is generic enough, like select, that will work for every use case. Similarly, a lot of people suggest that they want to be able to identify the capabilities of the device. This shows, essentially, two identical devices. They have the exact same version of Android, they're running the exact same browser. One of them shows web fonts, one of them doesn't. And the reason is that the carrier for one of them decided to turn web fonts off. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to know the capabilities of a device, just through straight up like evaluation of the device's capabilities and features. We have no reliable way to know what the capabilities of that device are, enough that would be solid that we could tailor the experience to them. Similarly, users often hypothesize that wouldn't it be great if we could know the bandwidth that somebody has, like we could tailor the experience for them based on how fast or slow their connection is. Web developers often want to be able to use bandwidth media queries to serve image resolutions according to their users' network conditions. I bet you can guess where I'm going with this. We got no reliable way to detect bandwidth. There's absolutely no way that we can know over the internet how fast or slow someone's connection is. And so when I hear people talk about all of these wonderful things that we should be doing to tailor the experience to someone's device, most of them are physically not possible. They're great ideas. It'd be cool if we could do that. But we actually cannot do that today. The only thing that we can reliably know is the size of the browser window. That's it. That is the only thing that we can reliably get back from a device that will tell us what we need to do to change the experience, to flex the experience. And I have great news for you. That is all we need. Responsive design is the most resilient, most flexible solution. Rather than trying to use expensive or complex or risky techniques to try to tailor the experience to the device, if we use responsive design and tailor the layout and the design to the size of the browser window, we will have something that adapts in most conditions. I want to make a related point here, which is that the idea that we want to know what type of device somebody has, that we think knowing if someone had a mobile device or a tablet device would give them insights about their behavior or what they wanted or what information they thought was most valuable is actually an incredibly unreliable way to make decisions. Device type won't tell you anything about the user's context. Device type won't tell you anything about the user's needs. You can't predict what someone's going to want or how they're going to want that information based solely on the type of device that they have. Chris Balt was the program manager from Microsoft who led the large-scale Microsoft.com responsive redesign. And he said, our data shows us quite plainly and clearly that the behavior on people of mobile devices is really not all that different from the behavior of people on desktop. The things they're seeking to do and the tasks they're seeking to accomplish are really quite the same. This is data coming from Microsoft about how people were, large numbers of people were using Microsoft.com. And I think that it's probably generalizable to a lot of different scenarios. Rather than going down a path of trying to guess what someone on a mobile device wants that's different, you are better off using responsive design. You are better off not trying to tailor the experience to the device at all. So, another question might be, when would it make sense to try to tailor the experience to the user's context? Now, I'll remind you of what my definition of context is, and I'll confess, I gave this talk a while back and someone came up to me afterwards and said, Karen, why are these things context? Isn't context something like waiting in line? And yes, of course, absolutely, that's context. But here's the rub. We can't know whether somebody's waiting in line. I mean, even the most creepy surveillance state data that we have right now isn't going to tell you whether someone is bored and waiting in line, and so you should serve different information to them. Context means taking what we can know from the device sensors and making assumptions about what the user's doing based on that. Now, these cues are always going to be an inadequate proxy for what the user's actually doing. I will give you a very specific example. I have worn hearing aids for the past 35 years. And so today, I have these like fancy Bluetooth-enabled hearing aids. They talk to my phone, and if you're interested in the future of audio wearables, I already have them. So if you know anything about digital hearing aids, they come pre-programmed with a series of different soundscapes. So I have a restaurant program, I have an auditorium program, and this particular model comes with a car program. Now, what's fascinating about this car program is that it's automatic. the hearing aids will automatically shift to the car program if they know I'm in a car. How do my hearing aids know if I'm in a car? Well, the iPhone will monitor speed and will automatically change to the selected program anytime the iPhone is going faster than 10 miles an hour. So they are using a contextual cue. They're using the speed at which the device is traveling as a proxy for the idea that I'm in a car. But you can see that it's sort of an inadequate proxy. Like, I could be running faster than 10 miles an hour. I could be bicycling. I could be a human cannonball. Of those three, human cannonball, far most likely. But, okay, you get the idea. Like, we're taking information that we can glean from the device and trying to make some assumptions about what the user wants based on it. Now, location is obviously a solid example of when contextual cues are likely to provide value. So, in this example from a city guide, they've offered a set of nearby restaurants. Now, the IA in me can think of lots of different ways that they might present contextually related restaurants. Like, this restaurant here, maybe it's a pizza place, and they could show other pizza places. Or they could show highly rated restaurants, popular restaurants. But in this particular context, it makes sense to show nearby restaurants. Like, maybe I don't care if I eat pizza or a highly rated restaurant, I'm hungry, I want to know what I should eat. But, very important, do not mistake the idea of context or location-based cues for quote-unquote mobile. I know it's hard, mobile's the word that we use, but contextual or location-based cues can be used on every type of device. Here's an example from the New York Times in which they're doing essentially a glorified mail merge to present information about income inequality. So they have taken the location data from my desktop computer, I was in Manhattan, and then they've published a paragraph to say, consider Manhattan, our best guess for where you're reading this, feel free to choose another location. So they are dynamically publishing from a large data set the information that I think is most relevant to me based on my location. In an article that I think was grown in a lab with the express purpose of annoying me, called Responsive Design is Failing Mobile UX, the author says, you want to get to know your customers and determine whether they're pre, in, or post-store. You'll need to create a different experience depending on where the customer is based on the path to purchase. Okay, sure. I can see using location-based information to determine if the user's physically in the store. Nope. He says adaptive design enables the customer to have a customized experience based on the device he or she is using. Optimize the customer experience by tailoring the design and information to the device. No, do not do that. Tailor the design and the information to the user's context. Don't necessarily assume that because I am on a mobile device, that means I'm in the store or I'm on the go. The fact that I'm on my mobile device is just as likely to mean that I am on my sofa. If you used an actual contextual cue physically in the store, you would get a better experience for all users. And the truth is, people don't even really need this. A study by Forrester for the retailer Retail Me Not asked people where they had used their smartphone to perform shopping-related activities. And it turns out there's no significant difference in what tasks people will use their smartphone to perform based on where they are. Whether someone is at home or on the go or in store, they are basically equally likely to perform all tasks. The only time you see any significant difference is for things like people are less likely to pull out their phone to check store hours while they are physically in the store. Stephen Turbeck, who's the head of user experience for Fidelity, says that they have found similar results when talking about even completing complex financial transactions. He says, we've been pleasantly surprised by people's willingness to complete complex transactions on all the form factors, even on the phone. The truth is, people don't make really thoughtful decisions about what it is that they're going to do on which devices. And anytime you're trying to tailor that experience for them to the device, it doesn't really make sense. Instead, you want to tailor the information as much as possible to the context. Google knows everything about me, okay? Like, they have my email, they have my calendar, they have my search history, and you would think they know more about me than I know about myself. And yet, I went to Israel a couple years ago. What do you think the first thing Google asks me when I get to Israel is? do you want to switch to the Hebrew version of the interface? And it's just like, Google, I just feel like at this point in our relationship, you should be able to state with confidence that I don't speak Hebrew. And so, it's like whenever I go to Canada, Google Maps changes all the dimensions to kilometers, which is incredibly flattering, but ultimately not safe. So the problem with location-based targeting is that you are often mistaking the user's location for the language that they might wish to speak. So as my friend Kim Goodwin here says, this is one of the problems with location-based ads. Just because she's in Finland doesn't mean that she speaks Finnish. So another technique that people will often use for contextual targeting is based on time. Every publisher in America has shared this chart with me, in which they say, oh, well, people use their mobile when they're commuting, and then people use desktop computers when they're at their desk, and then when they're home at night, they use tablets. And so as a result, a lot of publishers have invested in particularly a tablet-only strategy to try to capture people's evening hours. In fact, the entire country of Canada right now is somehow participating in a large-scale A/B testing around device dayparting. This strategy stands out at a time, I think, when tablet sales are declining and when nearly every other publication is focused on smartphones. So La Presse, which is the Montreal daily, has adopted an aggressive tablet strategy. They have stopped their daily print edition in favor of their tablet editions. However, is this strategy going to succeed for them, focusing on tablets over the long term? The Toronto Star is based on the same platform as La Presse. They have spent $14 million in 2015 and another $10 million in 2016, adding 100 people to their staff. They wanted to get 180,000 users. They got 26,000. Their competitor, Postmedia, which has newspapers in Montreal, Calgary, and Ottawa, released separate apps as part of a 4-platform strategy of print, smartphone, tablet, and web. They ditched their tablet edition, saying that the tablet appealed to a very, very, very niche audience. And finally, the Globe and Mail tried to do mobile dayparting in iOS. If you want to know what a failed strategy, tablet strategy looks like, it looks like this in the App Store. Customers hated it. They hated the idea that they were only serving up particular information to people on a particular device at a particular time of day. Users want to be able to make their own decisions about what information they get, where, and when. A study by ExactTarget asked consumers how to rate the importance of brand factors. 91% of consumers say that access to content any way they want is important to them. 83% of users say that a seamless experience across their devices is important, and that number increases to 87% when you look at just people who own both a smartphone and a tablet. And so, as a result, when I hear people talk about their desire to do targeting, device-specific targeting, contextual targeting, it reads to me a lot like what I like to call personalization fanfic. They're like, wouldn't it be cool if we could scrape people's LinkedIn profiles and then we know what college sports teams they like, and so then we can dynamically target messages and color palettes to them? Or wouldn't it be cool if we could know over the internet whether someone was a visual or an audio or a kinesthetic learner, and then we could tailor the content to them based on their learning style? This is fan fiction. These are great ideas, but you're not actually going to be able to implement them in real life. Scott Leaware, he's a CMS consultant for Real Story Group. So he describes a scenario that is probably familiar to the parents in the room that he thinks should be solved with contextual targeting. He read an article called Netflix, You Don't Know Diddly About Context. So Scott has 3 children, aged 2, 4, and 6, and like many parents, he likes to give them his phone to entertain them when he's in a restaurant. And so he says, lazy parenting aside, why can't Netflix learn that when I'm in a restaurant, I navigated to on Google Maps on my phone, you have the location data, that somebody's going to want to watch Mickey Mouse? why can't it learn that when I'm at home in my man cave, that it shouldn't be serving up The Little Mermaid to me? Like, why can't Netflix use location-based and time-based contextual targeting to know what movies I'm going to watch based on where I am and what time of day it is? I have another solution to this problem, and it is called user accounts. Why? Why would you attempt to solve the problem of I don't want to watch The Little Mermaid by using expensive and complex and risky contextual targeting when you could just set up another account for your kids and then you don't have this problem anymore? So my advice here, fundamentally, don't use device as a proxy for context. So don't make assumptions about what the user wants, what type of device they have, what type of device they've chosen. Device type will always be the least accurate proxy for context. If you want to do contextual targeting, if you're looking to tailor the experience to location or time of day, then you are better off using those cues specifically rather than saying, oh, if someone has a smartphone, that means that they're mobile, or if someone has a tablet, that means that they're kicking back on the sofa in the evening. But I would also argue that it turns out that a lot of contextual cues, a lot of contextual-based targeting is actually unnecessary. Scott and Kelton Jones is the VP of Global UX for Expedia, and he says, what we've discovered as we do our ethnography research, our lab studies, as we watch the mechanics of our site from an analytics perspective, people make the same decisions regardless of the context. This is a travel brand, y'all. This is the most location and time-specific scenario that he can give. And they basically said, yeah, we tried out contextual targeting. We tried to deliver different information, different services based on whether we knew the user was traveling or not, or what time of day it was. He said people made the same decisions. So it's not worth investing. It's not worth going down that path if you could just deliver the right information to everyone. So I'm going to leave you with this. Most of the time, you are better off delivering the same information to everyone. Personalization goals aside, most teams are not actually in a position yet to deliver on true device targeting, true contextual targeting, true personalization. Frankly, I believe the best thing you could do for your website right now is get a really solid, lightning-fast, responsive design in place. Don't just do a retrofit, don't just squish things down, get that thing extremely well prioritized. Rewrite the content, make the site fast, get that thing really working. Start there before you jump into oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could target this information differently? Bill Scott, who's the VP of Next Gen Commerce from PayPal, echoed this when he said, thinking of responsive is just table stakes. It's just a default thing that should always happen. You may later decide that you want to create a custom experience based on device type or based on an app, but you don't have to go there first. You can start with responsive. Adaptive is not some kind of magical panacea for any problems that you might experience with responsive. So for all the people out there saying, oh, we have to go beyond responsive and we've got to tailor information to the device or tailor information to context, adaptive isn't some kind of magic wand that you wave over your website and then automatically it just does whatever your users want. Adaptive solutions are complex and time-consuming. They sign you up for a whole different set of problems than responsive does. So I really believe if you can solve your problem on the client side, if you can solve your problem using responsive design, then start there. It's going to be so much easier for you to manage and maintain over the long run. Forrester echoed this when they said, look, if our customers are expecting a coherent experience across touchpoints, why are we siloing our efforts by a narrow device category definition? Practically, the idea of one web reinforces the needs for unified systems, processes, and teams that drive real-world cost savings and digital business efficiencies. And lastly, let's say you come back, 2 years go by, you come back to me and you're like, Karen, we did it. We have a lightning-fast responsive design in place. It's really performing well. We know what content our users want. It's well prioritized. People are being able to complete their tasks on mobile. Everybody's really happy. Now we think we're ready. And you're like, yay, we solved like 95% of our problems here, but wait, we still have 5% of our problems that might need to be solved by contextual or device-specific targeting. Well, great. Now you're in a position to actually deliver the specific adaptive solutions that you need to solve a very, very limited subset of your problems. And in those cases, adaptive and responsive solutions are going to work together. I often hear people sort of treat adaptive and responsive as if they're like opposite ends of the spectrum, or as if they're like in some kind of fight to see who's going to win. The truth is, with the challenges that we face delivering the right experience across all of these devices and platforms, we need every tool in our arsenal to solve this problem. So it's not that you're going to implement responsive and then adaptive's going to come along and overtake it. These two things are going to work together to provide a great experience. I will leave you at last with a comment from Livia Blabate from Marriott, where she says it's important to acknowledge that most activities are universal, even if there may also be device or context-specific needs. By having the web experience unified through a responsive approach, we cover the base scenarios across the board and can later do a better job at handling device specifics. If you like this talk, you are going to love my new book. It is called Going Responsive. If you didn't like this talk, you should still totally get the book. It has a lot of other things in it. Thank you.